G'day, Binanceans, and welcome to this week's Binance Beach. We've got a special episode today, a huge milestone. We've reached 50 episodes for the show, and to celebrate, I've got the old faithful, our good mate, and yours, James, from the Binance Australia marketing team as well, mate, joining me. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Feel honoured to share a platform with you on the 50th Binance Beach episode.
Yeah, well, we get to raise the bat for the half century, tip the cap to the pavilion, and yeah, it's been fun. It's been a really interesting journey. I know for me, it's been a challenge starting a show like this, and it's been really rewarding. They say the most effective way to learn is to teach, right? And so reflecting back what I'm learning about this industry and what, the learning journey that I'm on through this show has been a really valuable experience for me. And I hope you've all enjoyed it. I hope you've all enjoyed being on the journey, and I'm definitely going to keep this rolling, try and get some more interesting people, have great discussions. And I mean, man, this is work, right? Jump on, talk about crypto. I do this for free, so I'm just stoked to be a part of it. You've been on a couple of times, but today we are going to be talking crypto adoption, Binance adoption, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the market as well. But we're also going to be giving away this absolutely hot to trot Binance Suitcase. You've got this one in the office with you, James. They look pretty schmick, don't they?
Yeah, I tell you what, they're a massive head turner. I've definitely rolled one of these through Sydney Airport, put it on the conveyor belt, and when it comes out, everyone's looking at who owns it. So definitely hot property. Really excited to give away one of these this week.
Yeah, we get a lot of requests for the suitcase. I know at OzCryptoCon last year, we had a couple of them on the stand, and I couldn't count how many people said, how do I get this? I want this. Give me the suitcase. Come on, I'll do anything. And I'm like, give me a Bitcoin. They're like, no. But no, I didn't say that. I can't say that because you need to win it today. So stay tuned for the end of the show, and we'll tell you exactly how you can get your hot little mitts on the suitcase. But the other big call out, James, that we've got for this week, which is significant for Binance, is an all-time high for BNB. Talk about to the moon. I mean, BNB launched in 2018, I think it was. And yeah, over the course of the last, 5 to 7 years, this token has seriously done quite well. On what date is that? The 28th of July, we hit that new all-time high of $861.10 US on Binance. Any thoughts or feelings on a BNB all-time high, James? Got to be pretty bullish on that one.
Yeah, definitely bullish. I think it's mirroring a rotation we're seeing from Bitcoin to some of the alts. It started with Bitcoin all-time high on the 14th of July, a couple of weeks back. And then we saw a rotation into ETH, especially given some of the ETH ETF inflows in the US. And then, a number of companies pivoting to ETH treasury strategy. And then I think we've just naturally seen, further rotation down the stack with XRP hitting an all-time high as well. And then BNB hot on the heels on Monday. So yeah, exciting times.
It is. It's good to see as we look across the market for the last week, except those cookies. Bitcoin's been pretty flat. I mean, we got to a new Bitcoin all-time high as well just recently. We'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, you're right. The ETH rotation plays on. ETH's had a really strong past 30 days or past 45 days. I think we're up 40%. We sat around that, 2,400 to 2,600 range for just such a long time. Actually, ETH hit 10 years today as well since its Genesis block. Does feel like it spent at least half of that time in the 2,400 to 2,600 range, became a stable coin temporarily before shooting back up. XRP is down a smidge, but you're right, did hit all-time highs. And across the rest of the market, we're kind of like flat or slightly down on the week. I think we finished last week on that significant surge. But definitely, like, the market seems to be in a pretty good place. The kind of major call out too was on Bitcoin dominance in the past week or so. Like, that really, kind of came right back down from that 65 level back down to that 60 level. And that absolutely reflects the rotation that you're talking about. That rotation to ETH, that rotation to BNB, that rotation to Sol. And we're definitely seeing that kind of play out in real time. But CoinMarketCap's altcoin index still sitting very low. So interesting to see that the altcoin index is really not flagging that we're in like a full altcoin season yet. So maybe there's a bit more to go. What are your thoughts on the market, mate? Are you bullish? Are you bearish? What are we going to see in the near to short term?
I'm generally pretty bullish, right? And especially as a long-term ETH holder, sufferer. It's been great to see some price action more recently. And and what a milestone as well. You mentioned it. ETH's 10-year anniversary today. I'm actually going to an ETH 10-year event in Sydney after this. So looking forward to celebrating with fellow stablecoin holders. I think generally quite bullish. Like, we've seen Bitcoin dominate and run up multiple times over the last year, driven by the ETF's launches last April. Obviously, Trump being elected and the positive sentiment around crypto regulation in November. Trump's inauguration in January, another spike, and then the all-time high a few weeks ago. And I think everyone was wondering, are we going to see any rotation, further down? And it's been encouraging to see some movement, right? And I think it just gives a bit of optimism, a shot in the arm for a lot of people who've been long-term holders of not just Bitcoin, but a portfolio of diversified like assets. And so, I think there's generally a bit more confidence in the market, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out over the coming weeks and months. Obviously, I think no matter how optimistic we are about the industry, it's still very very volatile and linked to a lot of what happens from a macroeconomic perspective. And we've seen Trump kind of calm down with some of the tariffs, but in more recent days there's been a bit more talk about that. And then obviously geopolitical tensions in the Middle East, which no one can foresee, and obviously how shakes the market. So overall, pretty bullish and pretty optimistic, but we'll see how it plays out.
I know last week on the show with Dave, we were talking about the rotation into altcoins and then the rotation back to Bitcoin. And his prediction, his forecast was that we would see, a fair bit of sell pressure on altcoins as they hit significant levels and people take profits. And I wonder if we saw that a little bit in the last week. But that Bitcoin macro trade seems to very much still be in play, but the rest of the market it definitely seems to be more volatile, more responsive to that kind of news than Bitcoin's been over the last kind of few months, or even over this year as a whole. What about Binance? I mean, Binance has had a pretty exceptional year. How many users do we have, and what can we take away from the progress of this company?
Yeah, I think you raised an interesting point. I'll come back to just that, adoption and new entrants into the market, right? But I think from a Binance perspective, we've had a great run into 2025. Last 2 weeks ago, we hit 280 million users worldwide, which I think I heard Rachel, our CMO, use the analogy that that's equivalent to one of the biggest retail banks in the world. Having 280 million users, customers, is pretty phenomenal. I think only Santander, who are the Spanish-facing, Latin-facing bank, have an equivalent number of users as a single entity. And so that really reframed the way I think about Binance and our mission to really onboard the next billion people into crypto. And just how special that is. That all coincided with Binance's 8-year anniversary, which itself coincided with a Bitcoin all-time high hitting
That it did.
$123,000 US. That was a really special day, actually. You missed out on that one, but we were in Auckland on a Monday night, and we had over 120 people come down through the doors to celebrate, our 8th year anniversary and the Bitcoin all-time high. And I think from that, it was really interesting speaking to people, because there was obviously people that have been in the game for quite a while. And, I was on the door saying, congratulations, happy Bitcoin all-time high day. And they're like, this is a given. Like, we know this is going to happen. And it was they were just kind of accepting of it. And expecting more. And then on the other side, I spoke to people that were very new to crypto, who weren't necessarily holding. And you'd say to them, Bitcoin hit 200,000 New Zealand dollars, which it did that day. And that would just completely break their frame of reference. I think the 200K mark was quite symbolic, especially when we think about, younger generations and people trying to get on the housing ladder. 200K represents, pretty sizable deposit, if not a house completely. And so for Bitcoin, for one coin to hit that price mark, I think was quite special. And it was really interesting to see both sides at that event. But yeah, it was great to celebrate, lot to celebrate from a Binance perspective this year, and hopefully many more wins and milestones to come over the next 12 months.
Yep, absolutely. I was pretty sad to miss that event in Auckland. That looked amazing. And like last year at CryptoCon, we had, 100K Bitcoin. It's always such a buzz at events when the market's ripping and things are bullish. And that whole week was green candle, green candle, green candle. It was absolutely ripping that week. And so, yeah, that looked fantastic. And I hope the users on the other side of the ditch enjoyed that one. It definitely feels like the biggest misconception in this space for brand new people is still the idea that you have to buy one whole Bitcoin, and that it's now completely out of reach, because who's going to enter the market and drop 200K in New Zealand or 180K in Australia on one Bitcoin? That seems incredibly out of reach for most people. But that misconception that it can't be fractionalized, and Bitcoin can. Bitcoin can be broken down into Satoshis. They're the cents to the dollar as Satoshis are to Bitcoin. And you can break Bitcoin into 100 million Satoshis, and you can still get started with just $20 or $50. It's still possible to buy tiny fractional portions of a Bitcoin. And so this is the most accessible entry point for most people when they sign up for the first time. This is the most accessible market. Even when you trade stocks, most of the time, even your fees are higher than that if you're using something like Combank. So keep that in mind, Binance. If you are talking to someone brand new from the industry, that you can fractionalize Bitcoin and it's still incredibly accessible for most people. You don't have to buy a whole one.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder. I'd be interested to know how many people are having those conversations with their newbie crypto friends, or people that haven't necessarily made the jump into the space yet. Because I think, when I think about the last time, say in 2021, when Bitcoin was hitting all-time highs, then we saw huge interest and surge in interest from Google searches, from a download perspective, from a registration perspective at Binance. And this year, we've seen multiple all-time highs, but we're still seeing search interest relatively muted compared to the peaks in 2021. This is worldwide. If you actually switch that to Australia, I think you'll see it's even more muted more recently, where Aussies aren't quite catching the attention quite as much.
Yeah, well, that's flicking to Australia, and you've got early in the year around the Trump meme coin launch was
well, that's 2024 you've got there. So that
2024.
There is, yeah.
So yeah, sorry, that's the inauguration in November. That would have been ETF approvals, Bitcoin ETF approvals, I think. And then you've got Trump meme coin there. That's wild that we still seem to be sitting at such a low level compared to, May 2021 when, the market was at all-time highs and things are absolutely ripping. And this might be FTX, I think.
I think that's Terra Luna. Terra
Yeah.
Luna was like May, June 22. FTX was November that year.
Yep. So there you go. There's Terra Luna and there's FTX. How good's your your memory? That's a pretty good pick, mate. That's a pretty good pick. Yeah.
Probably all the times I bought wrongly at the top.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's the sailor quote? That's an absolutely cracking little bubble song, actually. The Buying at the Top Forever with Michael Saylor. Definitely give that a listen. That's been on my work rotation. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I guess, that poses the question, are institutions now getting their run at this? And as a result of retail potentially being burnt by volatility in the past, has that opened the door to institutions and to corporates to come in and scoop up Bitcoin below, its market value, or in a period where we don't have a lot of retail interest? Is this allowing corporates and institutions to get in before retail? And yeah, is that a phenomenon that's happening right now?
I definitely think we're seeing an increase in institutional demand, right? And kind of mentioned the ETFs in April last year. We've seen Bitcoin treasury strategy like played out from MicroStrategy, now Strategy, and Michael Saylor being a massive proponent for that. And we've seen many other businesses follow suit. And then same again on the Ethereum side. More recently, we've seen businesses adopt an Ethereum treasury strategy with ETH being a yield-bearing asset. And just generally, banks in the US, your BlackRocks, your Fidelities, your VanEck moving into the space, and not just from offering ETFs, but also like using blockchain technology to test settlement and cross-border transactions. So institutions are definitely taking this a lot more seriously, and I think that's all due to the more regulatory certainty, I guess, from the US. And we saw that with a number of bills going through the US a couple of weeks ago, especially around stable coins. And I expect the growth around stable coins, and just hearing like more and more banks are thinking about launching their own stable coins. And so, yeah, institutions are here and they're only going to ramp up their investment into the technology and into this space. And it'll be interesting to see what that does for price action as well, and whether or not that drives up demand, which pushes up prices, which again further potentially excludes or puts off people that haven't made the jump into the space so far. It's something I think about quite a lot as a marketer when we're trying to onboard the next million Aussies into crypto in Australia. And you're seeing all these institutions pile in, but the search interest on Google is relatively low still. And what's that disconnect? So yeah, it's interesting to see how it's playing out. I don't know if it's because people did come in 2021 and did get burnt after the prices dropped, or if it's just the state of the economy at the moment. People, like, house prices are pretty high. People are struggling to save. Cost of living pressures. Do people have less disposable income? There are other priorities apart from investing. I think there's some really interesting questions that no one's quite got the answer to. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out over the coming months, for sure.
Definitely. I still think that's a massive factor. I think belts are so much tighter than they were in 2021. And I guess you could correlate that to like gaming data or gambling data or, other discretionary spending, and try and draw some conclusions from there. But I think, as someone who watches the markets a lot, the demand now at scale is not coming from retail. And if this trend continues with Bitcoin treasury companies, with the as you very rightly pointed out, the huge amount of institutional adoption, then retail might not be the market that drives this asset class from 2 trillion to 20 trillion. Like, that might not be the path. And I think that makes sense with how much capital retail has available versus how much capital and leverage institutions have available. So maybe this is the natural pivot. Maybe this is the asset class maturing. Maybe this is Bitcoin maturing. One of the most interesting phenomena we've seen in the last couple of weeks is those treasury companies coming out with treasuries other than Bitcoin. And that's a fascinating move. I mean, I think we were going to see that at some point this cycle. It makes sense. And I've seen some commentary around, Bitcoin treasury companies are the new meme coins, and that is holding some capital out of, some of the altcoin markets or the meme coin markets. These are the new hot topic, they're the new hot stock, and that's where the capital's going potentially. You look at things like Metaplanet and you go, yeah, wow, okay, like there is a fair bit of capital flowing in that direction. And then you've got, ETH plays or Sol plays or BNB plays. But it's such an interesting, different dynamic, right? I think while ETH is a yield bearing asset and these other, layer one blockchain tokens, potentially do offer yield through proof of stake systems, it feels like there's so much more competition on a layer one level than for Bitcoin, which kind of sits above in an asset class of its own within crypto. And so I think that's a super interesting dynamic that we'll watch play out over the next, I guess, like year or two. And whether that's a successful play or whether, Bitcoin treasury companies is the alpha play. And I think you could kind of think about it. I think about a lot of those areas of this sector as like tech plays or tech investments versus a Bitcoin digital gold. Like in my head, that's an easy way to segment that part of the market for crypto. And so then you think about, would a company go and invest, like would a company go and be an Apple treasury company or an Nvidia treasury company? Like that's a very different way of thinking about it, right? And I guess it depends on your long-term perspective on those assets. Like some people see ETH as ultrasound money, and that's, the future for ETH is beyond ETH as a tech play. It's ETH as money, and then you can go down the list, and every token has its pitch for world domination, right? But yeah, I'd love your thoughts on that phenomenon and how that's playing out in that part of the market.
Yeah, I think you have some really interesting points there, and a couple of things on that. I think most businesses have a treasury strategy, whether or not it's investment in like the S&P 500 or ETFs, stocks, cash, foreign currencies to kind of hedge some of their activities, especially if they're like multinationals. And so there's been people thinking about what's best to add to a balance sheet to ensure that the company retains as much value as possible away from its operations. So I think that's always been a thing. Whereas like more recently, people have been using their treasury and the cash within their treasury to invest or acquire crypto, Bitcoin or Ethereum more recently, in the hope that it will appreciate or in the hope that you can get yield at the same time, right? So I think it's just worth differentiating that companies have always had that strategy, and like companies have probably always had a proportion of Apple and Nvidia, like proportion of the S&P on their treasury or in their treasury. But I think you make a really good point about Bitcoin versus the others. And I think with MicroStrategy, it's quite clear. You're speculating on MicroStrategy's growth, on the underlying growth of Bitcoin. But MicroStrategy are going out and buying a lot of Bitcoin, which is then
2.4 billion overnight, I think it was.
Exactly, right?
So that's a phenomenally big buy.
That's a lot of buy pressure. Whereas I think the interesting thing is, and we saw this play out with ETH in the layer one versus like layer two wars, it's like, where does the value accrue? So say with all these treasury strategy businesses, whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, like is an investment into that company and that essentially that stock of that company, does that value then come down to an eventual purchase of that token and then increase the token price? And I don't think that's necessarily a given. It'd be interesting to see whether value does accrue from some of these like tangential plays. I don't pretend to know enough about economics to be able to predict that, but I don't think it's a given, right?
Yeah, and it probably depends on the tokenomics and the issuance of the token as well. Like Bitcoin's tokenomics is very well known. It's a meme in the space, right? 21 million, and you've got the difficulty adjustment and then the exponentially reducing supply, like slowing rate of issuance towards 21 million. And then you've got ETH's, ultrasound money narrative and that, narrative around supply. But then the further you go down, like, I think the further you have to dive into the tokenomics to understand whether, like the Bitcoin model, you're buying the very scarce asset, right? That's a big part of Bitcoin's selling proposition versus, I'm trying not to name and shame, but further down the list where, maybe there's been a history of, that blockchain not being as censorship resistant or not being as decentralized, and the token issuance not necessarily being as fair or as, predictable. And so you've got that mechanism and that element to play as well. But, at the core of it, a lot of these companies are using leverage, and you've got leverage on the way up. And of course, then, we've seen in this space before leverage and its impact on the way down. And when you do have a bit of a flywheel effect on, buy, pump price, increase value, buy, pump price, increase value, like, you really do have to acknowledge that can go up and it can come down. So, yeah, I've heard some people say that might be where we get the next bear market from. Who knows? But at very least, it's fascinating to watch.
100%. Like, I think me and you both agree, this industry never stops. There's always something to learn. There's always a new dynamic or a new, trend and something to keep on top of. And it's going to be I keep saying it's going to be a very interesting rest of the year and into 2026. With these new narratives starting to evolve.
Oh, 100%. How are we doing in Australia? How are we doing at Binance Down Under?
Yeah, good. Full well, we've got a lot to look forward to. We've just announced our title sponsorship for the Australian Crypto Convention, which is taking place at the end of November. We've been part of that for the last 3 years. Love the work that Dave and the team are doing, and we're super excited to welcome 10,000 crypto fans down to the ICC, and we're really excited to put on a good experience for them. I can't wait. It's one of my highlights of the year. I know you were on the potty with Dave last week talking about it, and I can just tell the excitement in your voice too.
Yeah,
so that's one of the things that we're most looking forward to. Can't wait.
Yep, and we've got a new GM, which we announced last week.
Yeah, so Matt's joined the team, thrown in at the deep end, brings with him a lot of experience from fintechs, and just been in the Australian fintech scene for a long time. So we're super excited to have him on board, ribbing him about some of his purchases. I won't disclose what he's investing in, but yeah, it's great to have him on, and the team's super excited.
And what about interest from the Australian market this year so far? I mean, we saw that the search trend, in the search trends, that retail locally doesn't really look like it's back in huge numbers. But how are we doing with local interest around the app this year and the number of people trading on Binance?
Yeah, really strong. Like, obviously the price is driven a lot of interest from our existing users, but also like new users, and especially in the last couple of weeks, we've seen registrations and downloads tick up, not to the same levels, interestingly, that we did see in January around Trump's inauguration and the launch of Trump's meme coin, but it's ticking up and ticking in the right direction. So it'll be interesting to see what the next big market catalyst is that draws in people's interest.
100%. And I feel like for everything else apart from Bitcoin, we're still waiting for that in many ways, even though we've had a bit of a surge and a bit of a rotation. Bitcoin has its big sound money trade. It has, the debasement trade, and that trade's been running hot now for, the last few years, basically since COVID, I think, and particularly has really escalated in the past, 6 months, a year, as there's been a lot more mainstream attention, mainstream media attention, and just general commentary around, fiat and the dollar and where that's going. But it feels like the rest of the market is still waiting for, more rate cuts or there is the regulatory pieces in the US, like the Clarity Act and the Genius Act, but, there's not necessarily like specific catalysts in them that trigger funds. Like they've been known for quite a while that that's a part of the Trump trade, and that's not new news, even though it's kind of happening. And so, yeah, do you have any thoughts on where that next catalyst for altcoins or for the rest of the market might come from?
I'd be purely speculating, so I'm going to keep that. I'm going to keep that to myself. But yeah, watching the market quite closely,
as we always are. Cool. All right, let's talk Suitcase. If you've put up with us for the last half an hour, you probably deserve to win this anyway. But that was a great chat. Hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, definitely ping us any questions you've got on Binance or Aussie crypto adoption. But how do you get your hands on the Suitcase? So what you've got to do, we'll be streaming this out on Twitter and on YouTube. You need to comment on the broadcast, not in the live chat. You got to comment on the post because we can't see the live chat after the show finishes. Or put in the YouTube comments, again, not the live chat, in the comments, with your price prediction for BNB at 9 a.m. on Wednesday, August the 6th in Australia Eastern Standard Time. And guesses close at 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, the 2nd August. So you got a couple of days to get your price predictions in. And the closest guess will win the Suitcase. You must be an Australian resident and you must be following us on those channels so we can DM you to organize delivery and where we're going to send it. But yep, give us your BNB price predictions in the comments on Twitter or YouTube. Closest wins the Suitcase. Do you want to throw your hat in the ring, James, or is legal not going to let us make price predictions? Maybe
definitely will not to make price predictions, but hopefully it sends it.
Yeah, that'd be nice to see another all-time high, and one of our great Aussie users sending this on the next trip to the moon or to Euro Summer or wherever you're going, repping the Binance Suitcase. That would be awesome. Pretty special piece of merch. We don't get many of these. So get your entries in, let us know, and we'll be picking a winner on next week's episode. Mate, thanks so much for jumping on. Another great chat as always.
Thank you so much for having me. And again, congratulations on the 50th edition. Not many podcasts make it this far, but yeah, it's been awesome seeing your journey and growth with this and with the audience. So yeah, keep up the great work.
My pleasure, Binanceans. Have a great weekend, and we'll catch you next week. Bye.
Please note that this discussion includes insights from non-affiliated third parties and key opinion leaders. Binance provides this platform for informational and educational purposes only and is not responsible for any content or insights provided. This information should not be considered as financial, tax, or investment advice from Binance.